Hello everyone and welcome back to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. Today I've got a few things to discuss, including a couple of NHL signings, discussing the first games of each of the second round series in the NHL, so a couple of injury updates for the past couple of days, and some off-season rumors involving the Los Angeles Kings, Minnesota Wild, and Tampa Bay Lightning. And we'll get to all that coming up right now. Hello and welcome to another video here at the Intent Hockey channel. As usual, I'll kick things off today with a couple of signings that have happened from around the NHL in the last couple of days. First, kicking off with contract extension, as the Minnesota Wild have extended forward Frederick Gaudreau on a 5-year contract that will have an average annual value of $2.1 million, and the deal will begin at the start of next season. Now, for Gaudreau, he's really found a great home with Minnesota. He's started his career out in Nashville. Then he went to Pittsburgh for a short stint there. Then he went to Minnesota, and ever since going to Minnesota, he's been doing fantastic. Last year was his first season in Minnesota. He did quite a great job, putting up 14 goals and 44 points in 76 games. This year, a little bit less productive, but still had a pretty solid season, putting up 19 goals and 38 points in 82 games. So he's been putting up consistently around the 40-point mark over the past couple of years. And if he can keep on doing that for Minnesota, I think that'd be amazing. Gaudreau's a really good third-line center, and I think he fits in really well with the Wild, whether he plays on like the second line or the third line. Now, the Wild do have a little bit of problem with center depth, which we'll get to later, but I think Gaudreau is an amazing fit in Minnesota, and I think extending him was the right move by Minnesota. And then 5 years at $2.1 million is definitely not a bad contract. It's definitely a really cheap contract, and it shouldn't take up too much of the Wild's cap space. So I think this is a really good signing. Gaudreau's a great middle six forward, and he's shown over the past few years he can be a really good depth scorer. So I definitely like this signing. Gaudreau should definitely be able to remain in Minnesota now for the next couple of seasons, and the Wild get a cheap middle six forward who can definitely produce somewhere around 40 points on a consistent basis. So really good signing for the Wild, I think, there. Gaudreau's definitely done a fantastic job this year. Maybe he'll be able to hit 20 goals next year. Will be the first time in his career. He got close this year with 19, but definitely he's done really well in Minnesota, and I think he fits in well long-term with the Wild. Over with a couple of entry-level contract signings now. We have two with the San Jose Sharks. First, Artem Guryev signed a 3-year entry-level contract with the San Jose Sharks. That'll have an average annual value of $860,000, and the deal will begin at the beginning of next season. Now, for Guryev, he was a 2021 5th-round pick, a left-shot defenseman, so he's only been playing for like a year over in juniors, so I think it's really great to see him get his entry-level contract. He's been playing over in the OHL over the past couple of years. Not been overly productive, but still pretty good. He had a goal and 12 points in 37 games last year. This year had 9 goals and 16 points in 47 games, so not bad. Not one of the better offensive defensemen in the NHL, so I still think he can definitely in time be a really good third pair defenseman for the Sharks. I mean, he really does look like a really good possible NHL defenseman. I think in time, he could probably be a good third pair defenseman. I mean, he'll probably still need another year in juniors, and then probably need another year in minors, so he's probably still 2 or 3 years away from competing for an NHL spot. But still, I think getting his entry-level contract signed is great, and I also think that in time, Guryev should definitely be an extremely talented third pair defenseman for the San Jose Sharks. The other entry-level contract signing for the Sharks was Ethan Cardwell, who was a 2021 5th-round pick. He signed a 3-year entry-level contract that have an average annual value of $868,000, and the deal will once again begin at the start of next season. Now, for Cardwell, he's definitely been a really talented forward over the past couple of seasons. He's a right winger, was drafted in the same year Guryev was, so definitely still only had about a year of development since being drafted. But still, last year he had a pretty productive season over in the OHL, putting up 23 goals and 58 points in 44 games, which isn't too bad. But this year he did amazing, putting up 43 goals and 90 points in 62 games. So he definitely blew his previous total out of the water, and does look like he could be a decent middle six forward for the Sharks in a couple of seasons. I think he probably will still need another year in juniors, maybe a year in minors as well, so he's probably still going to need another year or two developing, but I think in time, Cardwell could definitely be a really good, like, third-line right winger for the Sharks. So I definitely think Cardwell eventually should be a good NHL forward. I think he's just going to need a couple of years' time, but I think Cardwell and San Jose, as well as Guryev, both really good signings by the San Jose Sharks. And finally, here with the Carolina Hurricanes, they signed Dominic Fensler, who is a left-shot defenseman taken in the 3rd round of the 2019 draft, to a 2-year entry-level contract that will have an average annual value of $925,000, and the deal will begin at the beginning of next year. Now, for Fensler, he's definitely been developing for quite a while now, and I think getting him signed to his entry-level contract is quite good. Fensler seems to be a possibly really good defensive prospect for the Carolina Hurricanes. He is a left-shot defenseman who's been playing over in the NCAA over the past couple of seasons, and he's done pretty well. He's been a pretty productive defenseman over there. He had 5 goals and 31 points in 35 games last year. This year, put a little bit more pucks in net, putting up 9 goals and 31 points in 37 games. So definitely consistent 30-point player in the NCAA, and now he signs an entry-level contract. So I expect him to probably need a year or two back in the minors. I think he probably still needs a little bit more time developing. But I think in time, Fensler could definitely be a really good second pair of defenseman for the Hurricanes. And I think letting him develop over in college over the past couple of seasons was a smart move by Carolina. And I think getting him signed to his entry-level contract was a really great move. So I really do like that signing by the Carolina Hurricanes. And I think in time, Fensler should definitely be a really good top 4 defender for the Carolina Hurricanes. So that's all the signings I want to get to. Good for Frederick Gaudreau to get a long-term extension with the Wild, and good for the Wild to lock up one of their key middle 6 contributors on a long-term, not too expensive deal. Good to see Cardwell and Guriev get entry-level contracts from the Sharks. They both have pretty good OHL careers up to this point, and I expect them to continue to be really good players. And then hopefully they can eventually be good NHL players. And then Fensler, I think, should definitely be a good second pair of defenseman for the Carolina Hurricanes in time, but good to see him get his entry-level contract as well. Now that's all the signs we want to get to today. Next we go over to the playoff update part of the video. Now we've had all 4 second-round series play their first game of the series, so we'll get to all of those games. Now the first one's back on Tuesday as the Florida Panthers played the Toronto Maple Leafs to open up the second round. The Panthers came out quite hot, definitely really looked good coming off of their series victory over the Boston Bruins. They put up a couple goals, one in the first, one in the second, to quickly take a 2-0 lead over Toronto. But shortly after that second goal for Florida, Matthew Knies would score his first of his NHL career to put the Leafs down 2-1. And then Bunting, just a couple minutes later, would tie the game up at 2. And it looked like it was going to be 2-2 for a little while. But late in the second period, Carter Verhaeghe would score, putting the Panthers back up 3-2 going to the third period. And then Brandon Montour got the insurance marker late in the third to put the Panthers up 4-2, and that's the way the game ended, as the Panthers take Game 1 4-2 in Toronto. So Panthers go into Game 2 tonight with a 1-0 series lead. Then we went to the Seattle Kraken Dallas Stars series. The Stars started with an early goal by Joel Pavelski to give themselves a 1-0 lead early. Then Jaden Schwartz tied the game with a goal for Seattle to tie the game up at 1. About a minute after that, Joe Pavelski was able to score for the Dallas Stars. The second of the game put the Stars back up 2-1. And then 3 goals within the minute for the Seattle Kraken had changed the tie of that game. First, I think it was Justin Schultz that made it a 2-2 game. Then Eberle made it 3-2 Kraken. And then shortly after, Oliver Bjorkstrand made it 4-2 Kraken. So in the span of less than a minute, it changed from 2-1 Stars to 4-2 Kraken. And the Kraken were able to take that 4-2 lead into the first intermission. Also the second intermission, they were able to hold down the fort. But then a couple of third period goals, one at the midway point and one later on in the period, both by Joe Pavelski, would tie the game at 4-4. So Pavelski got all 4 goals for the Stars and was able to help the Stars send this game to overtime. And in overtime, in this clip I'm going to show you here, Yanni Gourde was able to get the OT winner for the Seattle Kraken. So even though Pavelski was a very dominant force in his first game back off of injury, and he looked fantastic, and he single-handedly helped the Stars get that game to overtime, Seattle was still able to emerge with the victory thanks to Yanni Gourde. So great couple first games there. Seattle is the one who takes the 1-0 lead into Game 2 tonight, so we'll have to see how those two teams, both Seattle and Florida, play today. Can either one of those two wind up with a 2-0 series lead heading back to their home arenas? It's going to be quite interesting to see. But then yesterday we had a couple of games as well. The Hurricanes played the Devils in their series opener. It was not a really good showing for the Devils. The Canes were able to get a couple first period goals to take a 2-0 lead, then got an early second to take a 3-0 lead. The Devils didn't even have a really good offensive showing. I mean, they got a goal to make it 3-1 in the second period, but it was midway through the second period, and it was only their second shot on goal, so they definitely didn't really look like a strong squad last night. They wound up going to the third period down 3-1, then they gave up a couple of third period goals that made it 5-1, and that's the way the game ended, 5-1 Canes. So that's the way the first game ends. Carolina takes a 1-0 series lead into tomorrow's game 2. And in this game as well, Akira Schmid was pulled from the game. So it's going to be quite interesting to see if they restart Schmid in game 2 for the Devils, or if they go back to Vanacek next game. But definitely, the Carolina Hurricanes just look the more experienced team. And even though they've had tons of injury troubles on their forward group, they're still pushing really hard with all of their depth guys that they've had to call upon, with guys like Svechnikov and Teravainen out. So once again, Carolina is showing that they can score at will, and they were able to take down the Devils in game 1. And finally, here with the Golden Knights and the Oilers, as we expected, a very high-scoring affair in game 1. First, Draisaitl was able to open the scoring for the Oilers to make it 1-0, but then 3 straight Golden Knight goals were able to make it a 3-1 Knights lead. I'm pretty sure it was Barbashev, then Theodore, and then Mark Stone who scored for the Knights to make it a 3-1 lead. But then Leon Draisaitl would score another late one in the first to cut the lead to 3-2. And that is the way the game went to the first and second intermission with 3-2 Knights. Then Draisaitl early in the third would complete the hat-trick to tie the game up at 3-3. But then a couple of goals, I think one from Barbashev, his second of the game, and one from Stevenson, made it 5-3 Vegas. But then on this goal here by Leon Draisaitl, it made it 5-4 Vegas over Edmonton, with Draisaitl potting his 4th goal of the game. So back-to-back nights, back-to-back 4-goal games. One from Pavelski in the losing effort against Seattle, and then last night Draisaitl pots 4 goals against the Golden Knights. So definitely he's been having a really great playoffs. I know McDavid was slow to get into the LA series, and Draisaitl really picked up the pace early in that series. So Draisaitl's been having a fantastic playoffs. And 4 goals cut the lead to 5-4. And, well, a lot of people would have thought that the Oilers were able to get at least one more push overtime. The Knights actually held down the fort. They were able to shut down the Edmonton offense, got a late empty net goal from Jack Eichel, and took this game 6-4 in regulation. It was actually the first regulation game the Edmonton Oilers have lost since March 11th. It's been that long of a period of time, almost 2 months since the Edmonton Oilers have lost in regulation. If you remember back in the LA series, both LA wins in that first round series were in overtimes. So the Knights hand the Oilers their first regulation loss in a while, and they showed the Oilers why they were the Western Conference champions in the regular season. So Knights take a 1-0 series lead into their game 2 on Saturday. So Knights, Hurricanes, Kraken, and Panthers have all taken 1-0 series leads in their game. We'll have to wait and see how many are able to continue to push and jump up to 2-0 leads. We saw last round, 6 of the 8 teams who took a 1-0 series lead wound up being eliminated in the first round, so we'll have to wait and see if that trend continues, and if more of the teams who wound up losing game 1 wind up winning the series. But for the time being, the Panthers and the Carolina Hurricanes in the East, and the Knights and Kraken in the West, all have 1-0 series leads, and I can't wait to see how games 2 and 3 go over the next little while. Next, over with the injury update part of the video. Now, there's not too many injuries right now for the NHL, but there is a couple over the past couple of games. Jack Drury, who missed games 5 and 6 in their first round series due to an upper body injury, was able to return to Carolina Hurricanes and got back into the lineup for Carolina. So good news for Carolina. Drury's definitely shown that he can be a really good bottom 6 forward, so good to see another healthy body there in Carolina, especially with guys like Teravainen and Svechnikov out. Then Joe Pavelski, who missed games 2 and 6 due to a concussion off that bad hit from Ryan Hartman. He was able to go for game 1 against the Kraken. Obviously, he scored 4 goals, but he definitely doesn't look at all affected by the injury, potting 4 goals in his first game back. So good to see Pavelski healthy, and good to see the effects of that injury did not really take a huge toll on him, and good to see that he's back, that he was ready for game 1 of the second round of the series. Brayden McNabb, who missed game 5 due to an upper body injury for the Golden Knights, was able to get back into the lineup and did play in last night's game against the Edmonton Oilers for the Golden Knights. So the Golden Knights also got Shea Theodore, who was a late scratch in game 5, back, and Mark Stone looked like he could miss game 1 due to an injury, also played last night. So the Knights had a really good, healthy lineup. I think that extra rest time, given the fact that they were the first team to move on, really helped that team, and good to see McNabb get back into game action. And lastly, with Mattias Janmark, he also missed games 2 through 6 of the Edmonton Oilers LA Kings series due to an undisclosed injury, but he was able to recover and was ready for Game 1 of the second round series and did play last night against the Vegas Golden Knights. So good to see all four of these guys get back into game action. I'll show you a clip here. Remember, all clips are credited to Sportsnet. But Timo Meier in Game 7 against New York Rangers on Monday took a huge hit from Jacob Trouba. A really bad hit. It was slow to get up. There was some possibility that he could play as early as yesterday's game against the Hurricanes, but he did miss yesterday's game with an undisclosed injury. Currently day-to-day right now, so not really great. Meier wasn't a very impactful forward in round 1, and I think he would have liked to start round 2 really well. But it's just really bad news that he's not able to go for Game 1. And hopefully he can recover and he's not out for an overly long period of time. He can help the Devils in the near future, but just really bad news the Devils to lose one of their top 6 forwards in Timo Meier for the next little while. And then a couple of injuries with non-playoff teams now. Frederick Gaudreau, who was with the Minnesota Wild, who just recently got eliminated, has suffered an abdominal injury. He's going to be out for an unknown period of time. Now, I would expect him to be back for training camp. Probably still about 3 months away, so I expect Gaudreau to definitely be healthy by then, but definitely not great news to see that he suffered an injury in the playoffs. And then Simone Edvinsson, who was a really good young defender for the Detroit Red Wings, suffered a shoulder injury. He's going to be out for about 5 months, so that's not great news. That 5 months timeline puts him early October at some point, so given the fact that he's going to be out till early October, it's quite possible he misses majority of training camp, plus he could miss the start of the season as well. So just not great news for Edvinsson, but we're hoping that he can recover quickly and he's ready at the beginning of next season. But that's all the injury updates I'm going to talk about for today. There's definitely going to be a couple more injuries over the next little while, as these playoffs have been really rough, as they usually are, and there's probably going to be a couple more injuries before we talk again on Tuesday. And lastly here, I'm going to talk about the off-season rumor part of the video. Now, definitely there's a couple of teams we want to touch on today. I'll start with Minnesota Wild, as they were the first of the 3 eliminated. So for the Wild, they had a pretty good season this year. They were definitely in contention for top spots in the Central for most of the season. Towards the end of the season, they sort of tailed off a little bit, allowing the Avalanche and Stars to battle out for the top spot in the Central Division. But they were a really good team this year. Philip Gustafsson did absolutely phenomenal. Fleury was a really good backup. That team did extremely well, even though they have a lot of cap problems right now. So, going into the offseason, what could they do to try and improve on this team? Well, the first big problem for the Minnesota Wild entering this offseason is the fact that the Parise and Suter buyouts, which they did a couple of years ago, that cap penalty which comes with the buying out players, has increased. Last year it was $12.5 million. This year it bumps up to $14.5 million. So that's going to take another $2 million off the Wild's cap. So that's not going to be really good for the Wild. That gives them a lot less wiggle room to try and make some adjustments to this roster. On top of that, you have Matthew Boldy's new long-term extension kicking in next year. So the Wild are going to be definitely one of those cap-strapped teams this year. But I do think there's a couple of ways they can improve this team. Goaltending-wise, I think they're good. Gustafsson's definitely showed he can be at least a starter at the NHL level, and Fleury's still a really good backup who signed for another year, so I expect them to continue to run with the Gustafsson-Fleury tandem. Gustafsson's a pending RFA, so they're definitely going to have to get him on a new deal. Probably going to be somewhere between like $2 and $4 million would be my guess, on like a 2 to 3 year deal. But definitely, it's going to take up a majority of their cap space. But I think Gustafsson's worth it. He's definitely shown that he can be a really good goalie, even though he's had a lot of inconsistent time in Ottawa. So I think Gustafsson's really good. He's the key in goal. They also have a young guy like Jesper Wallstedt, who should be an NHL goalie of the future in Minnesota, and should be a good goalie in a year or two. So I think they're set in the goaltending position. I think they should just try and extend Gustafsson and run with those two again. On the defensive end, guys like Matt Dumba, who's been a long time Wild, and John Klingberg are both going to be unrestricted free agents this year. I don't think the Wild have enough cap room to re-sign either one of those two guys. So I would expect most likely both Dumba and Klingberg to be gone. After they become unrestricted free agents, I think that those two could probably get some decent contracts on the market, way more than what Minnesota could pay for them. So in my opinion, those two are most likely gone. And in place of those two, I think that the Wild could probably call upon some of their younger guys. Calen Addison, who's going to need a new contract this year as well, had a fantastic offensive season this year. Wasn't able to get into any playoff games after the addition of Klingberg, But I think with the team needing some of those young guys to step up, Addison should definitely be in the lineup next year. Also, Brock Faber, who came in over from college, definitely took one of those top 6 spots in the playoffs. Looked fantastic. I think both of those guys should be consistent top 6 defenders with Minnesota next year. I mean, you still have a Middleton Spurgeon top pair. You can put Addison on the second pair with Brodin. Brodin was Dumba's pair. Dumba's more offensive defenseman like Addison, so I think that could really work. And then you could put Faber on the third pair. I do think they could probably maybe try and switch up their third pair, maybe try and get a cheaper third pair defenseman if they don't feel that Goligoski or Merrill is really the play there. But I think that's probably going to be the majority of their moves. I don't think they're going to do something overly extreme. I would expect them to probably just try and add something depth and let the young guys like Faber and Addison take over on the defensive end. As for the offensive end, I think they have a decent enough offense, and they're going to lose a couple of guys, but I do think that they have a good offense. I mean, they have guys like Boldy, Kaprizov, Zuccarello, Eriksson Ek. So they have a decent forward group. I think they have a decent top 9. I could see them maybe try and add 1 or 2 cheap top 9 wingers, but I think their major concern will be center. They do have a couple of good players who can play center, like Eriksson Ek, Frederick Gaudreau, Ryan Hartman, but for the majority of the thing, I think they need a true number 1 center. They don't have much cap space this year, only about $8 million. So if they could trade someone like a Merrill or a Goligoski on the back end, maybe they clear up a little bit more cap space. I think this team could really use a top-line center who can center that top line playing with Kaprizov and Zuccarello. And I think if they can get that top-line center, maybe have like a Marco Rossi, like a young center who could eventually be like a top 6 center, play like your third-line center, have like Hartman and Gaudreau play middle 6 wingers. I think this team could definitely do good next year. I think if they can find a top-line center and maybe rework that bottom 6 a little bit with guys like Reeves and Nyquist and Sundqvist all being UFAs this year, maybe get a couple of cheap options, this Wild team could definitely still challenge for a playoff spot next year, and maybe even beyond the first round next year as well. So, in my opinion, keep the tandem of Gustafsson and Fleury. They've done really well this year, and Gustafsson looks like a really good goalie. On the defensive end, I think you have to let Dumba and Klingberg go to free agency now, and at this point, try and let the younger guys take over. So instead of trying to sign anyone, you don't have that much cap space. Maybe bring in guys like Addison and Faber to internally be good top 6 defenders next year on the right side. And then if you look at the forward group, try and get a number 1 center. I think if they can find a true number 1 center on that team next year, they should definitely be an extremely competitive team next year. And I think if they can maybe sign 1 or 2 top 9 wingers as well, that team should be extremely lethal next year. But cap space is going to be a problem for this team next year. They only have $8 million, and Gustafsson and Faber both need new contracts. So, going to be interesting to see, but I definitely think if they can do that, the Wild should be a playoff team next year. Next was the LA Kings. They had a really good season this year. Were able to finish 3rd in the Pacific. Were in contention for that top spot just up until the end. But definitely, they had a really good season this year. For the 2nd year in a row, they were bounced in the first round by Edmonton. So I don't really think that's too much of a really letdown. Edmonton's a really good team. They have McDavid and Draisaitl, so it's just not really great news that the Kings haven't been able to get past them for the last 2 years. So definitely going to be interesting to see what they do in the offseason. I think if you look at their goaltending position, that's the position I think needs the most work. Korpisalo was able to be acquired by them. He's a pending UFA. He didn't do overly well in the last 3 games of that first round series. I do think that he's a good goaltender and will definitely get a contract somewhere. But I think the Kings need a legit starting goaltender. They have a guy like Eric Portillo who could be a good starting goaltender in the next year or 2. And they have Copley, who's still signed as a backup. But they also have Cal Peterson, who's definitely not been a really good goaltender over the past couple of seasons for LA. And he had looked like a goalie of the future for LA, but he's definitely not done overly well this past few years. So I think if they can trade Peterson to another team or for another goalie, I think they should definitely do that. And I think the Kings are going to be the team to watch out for to try and get one of those big-time goaltenders. I mean, we've talked about this before. Guys like Carter Hart in Philly, John Gibson in Anaheim, and maybe even Connor Hellebuyck in Winnipeg are all good starting goaltenders who could be on the trading block this year for their respective teams. And I think the Kings are going to be the team to watch out for. I think if the Kings can get a starting goaltender who can make saves for them when they need to, that Kings team will be taken to the next level next year. So if they can get one of those 3 guys, they have the prospects and the draft capital to do it. So in my opinion, they could definitely try and make one of those trades work. But in my opinion, trade Peterson, have Copley be back up next year. You can be Portillo be back up in a couple of years' time, and try and get one of these starting goaltenders who can help them get to another level next year. So, in my opinion, they need another starting goaltender, and I would not be surprised if they went out and try to acquire one. If you look at their defensive end, they got a lot of blue liners. I do think they could probably try and move one or two of them. They've got some good guys like Sean Durfee, Drew Doughty, Matt Roy, Michael Anderson. Brandon Clark should definitely be a full-time NHLer next year. They also have a couple of good young defenders. I could see him maybe try and add a veteran third pair defenseman just to round out that team. But I do think a guy like Sean Walker, who's definitely going to be entering the final year of his deal, doesn't look like he has a really good NHL spots on the roster for the Kings this year, could be a trade option for LA. I definitely think that's a possibility. On top of that's probably the best option. I do think they could maybe bring in like a top 4 left shot defenseman, because they do have a little bit of a problem getting some solid left shot defensemen who play on the left side. But I do think they have a pretty good top 6 with guys like Durfee, Clark, Roy, Doughty, Anderson. So I think they could probably bring in one more defenseman, but still, I think that defense looks really good. I would expect Walker to be moved, and they still have some other really good young prospects as well. So Kings are really good defensively. Also, offensively, they're a pretty decent team. They have guys like Kopitar, Kempe, Fiala, Moore, Deneau, Arvidsson, Velarde, Lizotte, Byfield. They have a ton of good offensive players on that team this year. So I could see them maybe move on from one or two of them. A guy that comes to mind is Alex Iafallo. Good middle 6 forward who can play second, third line minutes, but making $4 million for the next 2 years on a Kings team that could really use cap space, I don't think is overly ideal. So it would not surprise me at all if the Kings tried to move Iafallo in the offseason, maybe to offset the cap so they can bring in a new goaltender. I think that would be a possibility. I could also see him maybe try and move one or two prospects like a Tyler Madden or a Keel Thomas, who probably won't be getting very much time in the NHL level for LA. Maybe move one of those two guys to help get that starting goaltender. I think this team has loaded with good young prospects, and not all of them are going to be able to play for LA. So if they can move one or two of them to acquire a good goaltender and maybe a top 4 defenseman, I think that Kings team should definitely look into it. So in my opinion, try and get a good starting goaltender for the Kings, someone who can definitely make the key saves when they need to, and if they need to, move Peterson to make it work, because I don't think they really see a good future with Peterson anymore. On the defensive end, have Brandon Clark be a full-time NHL defenseman next year. Try and get a good top 4 defenseman on the left side who can play either via free agency or via trade. And then maybe move on from Sean Walker, who I don't think has a spot on that Kings blue line next year. And then on the forward group, move Iafallo, and then just keep on letting the young guys take over in that forward group. Because that forward group looks lethal, and it's definitely really stacked right now with all the young guys that this team has. So, in my opinion, move Iafallo, move Walker, maybe move Peterson, try and bring in a starting goaltender, and if they can, a good left shot defenseman. So that's what I think that Kings should do in the offseason, and if they do that, I definitely think they should definitely be back in the playoffs. And if they can get a good starting goaltender, and their younger guys continue to take steps, I could even see LA maybe winning the Pacific next year. So definitely I think LA's trending in the right direction. They just need to continue to grow. And lastly, here's the Tampa Bay Lightning. They had a bit of a down year this year. They've usually been a good top 2 team in the last couple of years. Definitely been really pushing hard. This year, they were 3rd in the Atlantic Division. Not the best that they've been over the past couple of years. They were worse than Toronto, worse than Boston. Even Florida was only a couple points behind them in a wildcard spot. So Tampa didn't really do overly great this year. I think they were definitely feeling the effects of not having guys like Andre Palat or Ryan McDonough in the lineup this year. But still, I think they were a really good team. They definitely showed that they were the better team on a couple of nights against the Maple Leafs. They just didn't get the lucky bounces. So definitely, I think they were a really good team. I think they pushed the Toronto Maple Leafs. But I think the Maple Leafs are the team who were able to get the lucky bounces. So where can the Bolts go from here to improve this team? Now, I don't really think this team really needs much improving. The Lightning are a really good team, but they've been playing a lot of long playoffs over the past couple of years. I mean, they won a couple Stanley Cups before last year, and last year they lost the Stanley Cup in Game 6 against the Avalanche. So they've definitely been playing a lot of long playoffs. So I definitely think they just need a rest. They definitely had a lot of long playoffs, and I think that team could definitely use a good rest and come back refreshed next year. But they are going to need some sort of movements as well. The team still has an all-star level goalie in Vasilevsky, and I would expect him to continue to be a really good elite level goaltender for the Lightning. So I don't expect him to be moved. Brian Elliott, who's their backup, is a pending unrestricted free agent, so I could see him either internally or via trade or free agency trying to replace Elliott if Elliott doesn't come back again next year. So I could see him be in the market for like a cheap backup goaltender. On the defensive group, they're still a really good team. They got guys like Sergachev and Perbix and Hedman and Chernak as their top four. I could see him maybe try and add like one more third pair of defensemen to maybe replace a guy like Ian Cole. But still, I don't expect them to do much on the defensive end. They still got a couple of good third pair guys like Bogosian, Radish, Fleury. So they still got a couple of good defenders there. So I wouldn't expect them to do too much there. But I think their big problem is going to be on the forward group. Now, they only have currently around $2.5 million in cap space to work with next year, but they do still have the Brent Seabrook contract. Seabrook hasn't played in the past couple of years, has been a long-term injury reserve over the past couple of seasons. It would also not surprise me if the Bolts moved like a lower-end draft pick to one of those Arizona or Chicago teams who need to gain some money to get to the cap floor and ask them to see if they can take on the Brent Seabrook contract. That way they're not on long-term injury reserve space this year. So it would definitely be interesting to see. But I think if they can move Seabrook, even if they don't move Seabrook, there's still about $7 million extra in cap space. So they could probably have around $9 million in cap space. Now that's a good amount of money to work with, but given what they need to do in the forward group, it's not an overly great amount. And they still have good top six forwards like Nick Paul, Steven Stamkos, Point, Kucherov, Hagel, Cirelli. So they still have a really good top six, but there's definitely some guys who they need to re-sign. Ross Colton, who's definitely showing he can be a really good third line forward. Same with Colton and Jeannot, who they picked up at the deadline, are both restricted free agents, so I think could probably get somewhere between $2.5 and $4 million on their next deals. So they're going to be interesting to see how much those two cost. And Alex Killorn, who's definitely been an extremely talented top six forward for the Lightning over the past couple of seasons, is an unrestricted free agent. And if the Lightning are going to be signing Colton and Jeannot to like $3 million deals, and I think Killorn could definitely get like $5 to $6 million on the open market, I don't think Killorn will be back in Tampa. So they'll have to try and use whatever they can to try and maybe sign one or two more top nine forwards who can help replace the loss of a guy like Alex Killorn. But definitely, as we saw this past year, they can't really replace good players like Andre Palat. So even if they do replace him with a couple of top nine wingers, it's still not going to be Alex Killorn. So in my opinion, they still have a really good starting goaltender. They could look for a backup if Brian Elliott could possibly be leaving. They still have an elite level defense. I could see him trying to add a third pair defender to the lineup to try and replace Ian Cole, who was a really good third pair defender this year and really did well when he had to be called upon. So I could see him look for another third pair defenseman. But I think that offense is going to be the key piece to watch out for this year. I think Jeannot, Colton, they're both restricted free agents. They both could get pretty decent longer term deals, I think, from the Lightning. So it's definitely interesting to see Jeannot or Colton and what they could sign for. And I do not see Alex Killorn returning with this team. So they also have a couple of depth guys like Belmar and Perry who are UFAs. So it's going to be quite interesting to see who they're able to bring back with their limited amount of cap space. And with their limited amount of cap space, who do they get via free agency or via trade to try and replace Alex Killorn in this lineup? But definitely interesting to see. And I think even though they might lose Killorn, they're still an extremely talented team. And it would be quite surprising to me if the Lightning wound up missing the playoffs next year just because they lost Alex Killorn to free agency. But I think the Lightning will definitely be able to keep whoever they need to keep. And hopefully after a couple of off-season changes this year, this team can go back to being a very dominant team in the Eastern Conference next year. But definitely like to hear what you think. Do the Wild try and rework that forward group? Can the Wild get a top-line center in the off-season to center a guy like Kaprizov and Zuccarello? Can the LA Kings get that starting goaltender to help push them over the top for next year? And can the Tampa Bay Lightning find some way to keep Alex Killorn on that team? And if you don't think they are able to keep Alex Killorn on that team, which players do you think they should target, either via free agency or via trade, to try and replace Killorn in the offseason? Definitely like to hear what you think down in the comments. And just a channel update quickly. Next Monday, I'm going to be doing one quick video discussing the results of the draft lottery. So definitely keep in touch for there. As in definitely going to be doing a quick video just discussing how the draft lottery went and who won the draft lottery. Who will be able to have the chance to draft Bedard. As that's definitely going to be interesting to see who could have their future changed on May 8th. So definitely keep up to date on Monday, as I will probably be posting a video at some point on Monday And then keep up to date as I'll continue to do my Tuesday and Thursday videos next week. So that's all I'm going to talk about for today. Remember to like this video and subscribe. I also do a blog, which I'll link to that in the description below. And I can't wait to see you guys all for the next video. See you guys soon.